Welcome to Whistleblower Network News. I am your host, Jane Turner, FBI whistleblower and advocate. It is our honor to share with you these experiences of real life heroes and people of integrity. Welcome to Whistleblower of the Week. I am your host, Jane Turner, FBI whistleblower, whistleblower advocate, and reporter for Whistleblower Network News. Today, I am so excited to have on Reality Winner. Reality Winner was a highly decorated veteran. And coming as a U.S. Air Force veteran, she became an intelligence contractor for Pluribus International at Fort Gordon in Georgia. She was imprisoned for leaking a top secret report on Russian hacking. She was the first person to be prosecuted and later sentenced under the Trump administration for defying the Espionage Act. The classified documents, later reported by The Intercept, detailed the Russian government's efforts to pierce or spearfish a Florida-based voting software supplier ahead of the 2016 election. Winner said she was motivated to act on a belief that the American public wasn't getting the full truth. Winner was sentenced in 2018 to more than 5 years on a single count of transmitting national security information, then the longest federal prison sentence imposed for leaks to the news media. She was let off early for good behavior in 2021. Welcome, Reality. I'm so excited to have you on because there is significant public interest in the information you admitted to disclosing. You said you were not, quote, motivated to act on a belief that the American public wasn't getting the full truth. And, I look at you as not Reality Winner, but Reality Revere, because you're like Paul Revere. You went through the media to let them know about Russia, and that is a critical thing. In fact, just recently, the U.S. intelligence assessment to 100 countries showed Moscow was using spies, social media to erode public faith in the integrity of the democratic elections worldwide. President Macron came out just the other day and talked about Russia interfering in the French elections and trying to sow disinformation and blur the between reality and unreality. So what you have done is so critically important, Reality. I can't even begin to tell you how important you are. And you have really started something that is critically important. Tell us about your background and the work you did as a defense contractor.
Well, my defense contract was mostly clocking in and clocking out, listening to music and studying Thai yoga, massage, and lifting. It was a transition job for me to basically, your security clearance expires, I'm sure you know, and I really wanted to pursue contracts that would get me deployed to Afghanistan, where I could actually use the language that I am passionate about, which is Pashto. Um, so while my resume was out there and I was working with various recruiters, the biggest thing that was holding me back is that my security clearance only had like a couple months left on it. So they didn't want me, I wasn't really eligible for any of the deployments. So I started kind of I lowered the bar and started going for some Farsi linguist or Farsi translator options. And so I got that position in Georgia. I actually didn't know. I applied for so many jobs that I didn't know what city it was in when I accepted the job offer. I had made a really lucky guess that, I started up a house in Augusta, Georgia. I moved everything I owned or everything I could carry in my Nissan Cube. And then I went home for 3 weeks for Christmas. And I had stayed longer after Christmas because my father passed away right before Christmas. And that was when I got the call that, I made it, I received the job, and that I would start on February 9th. And I just remember at the very end of the conversation, me asking, I'm sorry, which NSA was this job for? That's how invested I was in this, right? So luckily it was in Georgia. And so I started, and it was just mostly translation, Farsi language translation, and that's as deep as I can get into it. Um, yeah, that's the unclassified job description that you would find like on LinkedIn for such
Yes.
a position. I didn't do much of it. Like I said, I was just really not invested in the job. I did not realize, like, when you have that contractor status, contractor badge, um, my actual supervisor was retired Army, but not a linguist in any way, shape, or form. And he didn't even sit anywhere. He was on a different floor. He said, "Yeah, I don't go over there with y'all nerds."
Yes.
Um, and then so I was kind of handed off to this government supervisor of sorts who was, up to his neck in his own workload and didn't have any time to train me or tell me what I was doing. Um, so I could tell you I did nothing of any import. I think that is one of the things. I was like, I had lost my father,
Yes.
and I had zero connection to the job I was doing at the time. That really left me so vulnerable to making such an impulsive decision. Um, because I was just kind of just bored for 8 hours, and then I was clocking out, making more money than I knew what to do with. And, um, before that, I worked on a very active mission in the Air Force and was very much connected to what was going on in Afghanistan. So to have so much pressure and then to be in such a vacuum, all of a sudden kind of took an emotional toll on me as well. Like I just felt very like futile.
And I'm sorry about your dad. I know that he was the one who named you Reality, and you were probably quite close to him. So I can see where you were vulnerable. And there was other things going on at that time also. This was during the presidency of Donald Trump, and of course he was coming out and saying that he felt that Russia wasn't involved in doing anything suspicious with our elections. I mean, there was a lot of things going on. Were you watching television and aware of these statements that were being?
Yes, actually, this was the first time in my life I was beginning to dabble in political activism. Um, I had just changed my residency to Georgia for the first time. So, being in the military, you're jumping from state to state, but my home address was always in Texas. So, what was going on, or even the idea of voting in elections, none of that really mattered because Texas kind of does what Texas does.
Yes.
But here I was in Georgia and I was a resident, and I started seeing more just blatant lies. I think this was one of the first administrations that I had been aware of that they would say something and then people would immediately 5 minutes later be like, we have actual photographic or live video evidence to the contrary.
Right.
Um, so for what really got me as an environmentalist was the Dakota Access Pipeline protests that were going on at that time. I had actually initially planned to be at there was a veteran stand the first weekend of December in 2015. Unfortunately, I had surgery at the last minute, like the day before. So I didn't go to that. So I was also feeling a way like I need to get involved. And I just remember, that was when the brief stint that Kellyanne Conway was the press secretary. And she said, no one's protesting this pipeline.
Oh,
Everybody wants it and no one's protesting. And as somebody who got online every day to see what the protesters that day were experiencing and going through, um, I immediately set up a meeting with the state director to pass the message on to my state senator, which was Purdue at the time, and just demanded someone in the Senate at least make it known to this administration that your press secretary can't tell lies like that. Um, right? I mean, I was 24 and just kind of like, the government shouldn't be lying. I mean, and I had worked for, like, I believed in the system, obviously, because I was still part of it.
Sure.
And so I had actually stayed in contact with that state director on different environmental projects that would negatively impact not just Georgia, but Augusta, Georgia in particular. Um, and that was sort of my, I guess, first step into trying to become active in how our government works.
Exactly. And so you're sitting there, and you're not any dumb blonde. In fact, you're the opposite of that. Not only did you know one language, you knew several. I mean, you were kind of brilliant, weren't you?
I don't think so. Um, there's just certain things that I can pick up. But my Achilles tendon is actually because I can pick up some things, I actually don't know how to study other things. So, like my whole time in school, I have a near photographic memory. So
Oh,
I either know it or I don't. And like the study skills or the good discipline, I've never had that. And I think my father was the same way.
yeah, I think you mentioned that in one of your interviews. He sounds like a wonderful man. I know your mom is a wonderful woman. So you came from great stock, and your stepdad is a great guy. So nobody can look at your background reality and say, "Oh, that's why she did this." I mean, there you were just a regular run of the mill American kid who was really, like you said, you have a photographic memory, you're really quite brilliant. But so you're sitting at work, and what happened that set you on this journey?
I think it was a gradual erosion of just a gradual erosion. Um, it was kind of like a steady downward slope towards disillusionment. It's really hard to imagine. I mean, to go back to 2017 and all the unprecedented things that were going on in those first 5 months of that administration. And what I did start to notice is that the podcasts that would come out on like Sundays and Mondays were just, I mean, they were popping because every Friday afternoon there was another disclosure of classified or closely held information. There was just never a paper trail.
Yes.
It was just a staffer of a congressman saying,
Yes.
the most, scandalous thing was going on in either the White House or in government in general. But some of these things were very, very serious. Um, so it was almost like, oh, well, everybody is doing it because every single week somebody did it.
Hmm.
And it was always the most lucrative timing for the journalist as well.
Hmm.
Um, so you're paying attention to that. And of course, nobody's ever found. And you don't really kind of realize on the flip side, like, they must be dying to catch somebody at this point.
Hmm.
Um, so it was like everybody's doing it, nobody's getting away with it, and we see a report, and everybody in the office that sees it, is not thinking it's going to be leaked from NSA. That it's not going to come from the government. It's not going to come from us, the servants. It's somebody in Congress is going to see it, and their staffer's going to see it, and there's going to be a whisper of it, and it's going to be out this Friday. You know what I mean? Like, we wouldn't be so cynical as to make actual wagers on that. But everybody in the office kind of was like, yeah, all right, we're going to see this Friday,
Oh, sure.
because everything else that we had been seeing was like, you know what I mean? Like, it just kept coming out. And that Friday came and went, and it didn't happen.
Mhm.
Um, and that was kind of like, oh, okay, so this is the one thing that can't be spoken about.
Right.
Um, so that was when things just kind of went downhill, and just seeing, the next week Comey being fired in a very like related sense
Yes.
was like, okay, now this is being repressed. If you even mention this, apparently your job is gone.
Yes.
I had no idea. I mean, nobody could have known. It was fantastic journalism by Sonia Kennebach for the documentary Reality Winner
Yes.
at the time, who actually revealed that our government actually hadn't seen that information. So the people who had procured or created that report had seen it. The highest levels of the government had seen it, and about 2 million contractors and people within NSA had seen it, but the Congress and the Senate were somehow not shown it.
Yes.
Um, and so that was kind of like, I never would have imagined that. I thought everybody was in on it at that point, which was kind of the source of so much disillusionment. Um, it just really sucks that you someone had to break I had to commit a felony of the highest degree for the Congress to see 3 pieces of paper that belonged to them.
Yes.
I think if there anything about this even phases me anymore, I think that's pretty much the only thing that kind of just makes me go like, "Yep." That's the crazy part right there.
It is crazy. It is crazy. And that's why I say your legacy is still to come, reality. I can promise you that. Because during this time, President Trump is saying, quote, uh, I did not see any reason why Russia was responsible for hacking the 2016 election, which you knew to be a lie. You knew that to be a lie at that time. It's interesting you were also prosecuted under President Trump for the Espionage Act. Do you suppose, and he was the one who nominated your federal prosecutor who prosecuted you. So, do you think that there was a vendetta by the highest levels that was used against you? I mean, you got really punched really hard. Do you think there was some personal feelings involved there?
Definitely, I think that my timing could not have been worse. Like I said, they were looking for somebody, and I basically just, volunteered myself for that. The subject matter was very sensitive. My stepdad always says, like, I committed the gravest sin ever. I embarrassed the government. It was embarrassing. Um, and they absolutely knew what they were doing when they prosecuted it in that particular courtroom. Even though it did happen within that district, it very easily could have been moved to a national security courtroom closer to DC, where there was some actual experience in national security matters. Um, because this is the first case of anything like that court had ever had. So it was very surreal to see the judge asking not the government for help, but the prosecutor for help on how to prosecute this case.
The
Um,
one the
that
one
was
appointed by Trump.
Yes. but
Yes.
not just the DA, but just, yeah, I mean, he went straight to the prosecution for the ground rules. And, that would be like the referee asking
Hmm.
the offense if their goal counted.
Right.
And so it was kind of like, I didn't realize like that was highly abnormal, that a lot of times these cases are brought to a national security court.
Yes.
Obviously, if we had requested that, it wouldn't have been granted. But that, the magistrate really was in over his head as to how to prosecute this, which meant that the people trying to put me away for 10 years made all the rules as they went along.
Exactly. Exactly. What is amazing though to me, I want to ask you a quick question because I am amazed by your story, and I have to share with you in my termination papers. It had the reason for termination because I embarrassed the bureau. So I am sure that there was an issue of embarrassment for the government, that particular government at that time, because they did go after you with a fury. I mean, it was amazing. But back in June of 2017, I hate to take you back then, but Intercept published an article about this 5-page national security agency report, as you know, because you were there. Did you know that you were a whistleblower? Did that cross your mind before you did it, when you did it, or after you did it?
I think when I did it, I understood that my motivations were nothing but good intentions, and that anybody who is the slightest bit literate could discern that.
Right.
Um, I didn't call it whistleblowing, but definitely just knew that it was very clear what was going on, and I was so wrong. Like nobody saw it, like nobody could understand it, and nobody could even understand that I was a person because of my name.
Yes.
Um, so I just thought, and that's why I didn't think much like a criminal when I did it. And I didn't even call an attorney. I didn't look up anybody else who had done. I didn't actually know who Daniel Ellsberg was fully until I went to prison proper and was sent the Pentagon Papers. I
Yes.
didn't know this was a thing. I just knew that this information got out every Friday and nobody got caught. But that if I were to be caught, it was so clear, like, and no harm was done. That I would lose my job maybe, but I didn't think that I would almost lose my life over it. And, I just, yeah, I didn't really think that it was like a great virtuous act, as more of like a, of course we want this information moment. Like,
Well, it was a great selfless act. I have to tell you that. And the day after the story came out in The Intercept, the Election Assistance Commission, federal agency, wrote an urgent bulletin to states providing advice on how to take action on these state election because officials did not know. So this is what's incredible about your story. You sounded the alarm like Paul Revere, and people took notice of it. The actual federal agency, the Election Assistance Committee, came out and gave a warning to the states based on the information that was in Intercept. And I'm sorry that your cover got blown by Intercept. This is a common thing we see with whistleblowers, and it's just sad because your actions have reverberated across the world. Then the amazing thing was to me, and I'd like to see what you think about it. Not only did the Election Assistance Commission came out, but on in July 13th of 2018, the Russian unit was identified, which they hit you with and put you away for. It was identified in a federal criminal complaint, the GRU Unit 74455. It was noted in a criminal complaint. And they mentioned not only that unit, but 26165. And they said right in that criminal complaint, which was federal, in federal court, these units conducted large scale cyber operations to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. And you know who that was signed by? Robert Mueller III. So it's the same info. And the GRU, it wasn't like you tipped off anybody, because the GRU was aware in 2016 that the US was watching its activities because they changed them. So in the sentencing memorandum in August of 2018, all these times are really important. They said that they felt you did grave harm to national security, but that wasn't true, was it? This stuff was public knowledge. So they really ginned up this case, I feel, and really put you away for a long time to show people what could happen to you if you leaked anything. Do you feel that was kind of on the forefront?
Oh, definitely. It was definitely a message to anybody else that was thinking about it. And I think the most moving forward, the most important thing is that we don't necessarily decriminalize this behavior, but we do modify the Espionage Act to give it more nuance. Because Terry Albury, Daniel Hale, other people, it's under the law, it's black or white. You did it or you didn't. And if you did it, you're going to do the full time for it. Um, and unfortunately, the law has no nuance or no levity for whether or not this was actually national defense information, because it says national defense information, not necessarily classified information. And it does not have any, I guess, I'm trying to think of the word, it doesn't allow for any public interest argument to be made in the court of law. And it does not account for if tangible damage was done. The government never had the burden of proof of saying this release caused this damage. There was no
Correct.
cause and effect. So there's no other way. I mean, could there be a lesser charge? Could there be that misdemeanor mishandling classified information versus willful retention and disclosure of national defense information? And then once indicted with that, if you did the action, you can no longer state what your intent was. There is no difference between what I did and somebody else actually making personal money selling information to a hostile foreign government. It doesn't matter if you gave the information to your grandma, to the media, or to North Korea. Under the law, it does not matter. And I find that to be concerning.
In fact, you mentioned that the application of the Espionage Act, quote, is inconsistent and vague, unquote. You still hold to that, don't you? Because it is.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you see it right now with um, ongoing cases where information was leaked maliciously, and they're not going through anything better or worse. They're probably going to have an easier time in court than I did.
Oh,
Not
yes.
that I wish hardship on anybody, but it's very difficult to see other people being treated so much better, you know? Like, why can't we
Yes,
all just be treated well? Why can't all of our rights be considered? What is the need for pretrial detention in a case like this? You know what I mean? Unless you are caught at the airport, you should not be considered a flight risk.
correct. Did they term you a flight risk reality?
Oh, yes, I had 30,000 in savings that I was going to somehow escape the country with, even though they took my passport, and start a new life in Afghanistan.
Oh my. Yeah.
And that
That's
was a fact in court. That became fact.
they just painted you as terribly as they could, didn't they? Just
Mm.
painted you, just tried to vilify you and dehumanize you. I mean, it really was something. But now do you embrace the title of whistleblower? Do you embrace that now?
Hi, we'll be right back with more of Whistleblower of the Week after a quick message from one of our whistleblower friends. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, this is Austin Handel, known on social media as Officer Ash, but also known as the Dunwoody Whistleblower, and the Vice Chair of the Lamplighter Project. The Whistleblower News Network strives to be the best source of information on important whistleblower stories. In addition to in depth interviews with whistleblowers, Whistleblower News Network provides timely coverage of breaking whistleblower news, detailed analysis of whistleblower legislation, court cases, and exclusive investigative reporting on government whistleblower programs. Subscribe to the Whistleblower News Network to stay up to date on all things whistleblowers.
Personally, I do not because I want to make sure that whistleblower is reserved for individuals who act within the scope of the law. There are, I didn't explore any other option for getting this information out. I didn't talk to anybody about it. There was some cynical office talk that it would be out by Friday, and then I snuck the document out under my clothes and mailed it anonymously. Um, this is something that could have been taken to Congress, could have been taken to my supervisor. Um, so I want to make sure that when we use the phrase whistleblower, we do talk about individuals who are acting within the scope of the law, and that what happens to them then is not a legal prosecution of the law. It's actually just like personal retaliation against them, and that there's protections against that instead, because that hasn't happened yet either. In the case of Dawn Wooten, who blew the whistle on women in ICE detention centers, women of color in ICE detention centers, being sterilized against their will without even being told they were being sterilized. She lost her job. She is a corrections officer. That is her career field, you know, and she couldn't get a job in any state, even near Georgia. She had to uproot her entire life for this because she said, sterilizing women against their will and knowing shouldn't be legal. That's definite retaliation.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But at that time, were you familiar with the whistleblower laws and policies? I mean, it is a Byzantine system full of turns and roadblocks, and takes years and years. Mine took almost 16. You see, whistleblowers today working through the system, they make it so difficult. But back then, were you even aware of the routes that were open to you?
No, and at no point did I even try to look him up.
Okay. And I noticed that there was a very interesting quote by you about President Trump and his current problems with security clearance and the items he had that were top secret. You were very kind, I thought. You certainly didn't say, give him the same that was given to me. You were very kind. Can I ask you your thinking behind that?
Yeah, so I definitely don't move forward in my life channeling everything through any sort of maliciousness or vindictiveness towards anybody. Um, More so than matters of national security and whistleblowing, what I am focusing so much of my time and energy towards is the path to restorative justice and using that same path of restorative justice for everybody. And in this viewpoint is the abolition of incarceration for crimes that do not involve violence or victims. So in this particular case, there aren't. So if this is a matter of removing the classified information from him, if it's a matter of barring any future access to it, it's increased surveillance of him and his communications. All of these things can be accomplished without incarceration, should there be a conviction in that case. As far as incarcerating 80-year-old men who did not commit an act of violence, that goes against the system that I'm personally seeking to reform and improve in the United States.
And I think that will be part of your legacy also, is the kind, temperate person you are. I mean, you look at Daniel Ellsberg, and well, he's gone now, but his history and his reputation. I have no doubt that you'll carry the same significance in history. And I'd like to ask you about some of the crucial issues in your case, if I could. One is the idea that DOJ, they have a contention that national security claims by the executive branch can never be challenged. Do you agree with that?
I agree that that is definitely their position.
Okay. And it is.
It is.
And it is. And this idea that the executive branch has sole authority to decide when information should be secret. Do you agree with that? That the executive branch should be the one with the sole authority to decide that when information should be secret?
I don't. I think that we deserve to see all the files on the JFK assassination.
Excellent. And what about the idea that the DOJ can prosecute journalist sources for harming, quote unquote, national security with no public evidence at all?
Without public evidence, without a public trial, it's extremely disturbing, especially in my case, because we did go through that. We had public hearings, and then we would break for an hour and then go upstairs to the classified courtroom. And nothing in that classified courtroom, like no journalists were allowed, obviously. But what I can tell you is that if Kafka were alive today and he were to write um, another novel about someone in my position, he would tell us what was happening in the top secret courtrooms and that the same facts were repeated and that no new information was added that the public couldn't have heard and that no information was discussed at all. And so it is incredibly disingenuous to say that we are prosecuting these cases in top secret courtrooms to further protect classified information from being disclosed, even inadvertently, when there is no classified information to be discussed behind closed doors. And to say that we weren't allowed information. So we submitted 41 subpoenas and 40 were denied. We were not allowed to request information from the NSA asking for proof of damage to national security. So we would not have even been allowed should we have gone to a public jury trial to tell a jury of my peers we have zero evidence of damage to national security being done by this action? So while a disclosure was committed, this is something for your consideration. You're not allowed to make that argument.
And you should have. I mean, the fact that Robert Mueller provided the same information that you did is mind-boggling. It's
And
mind-boggling.
I was allowed to have the Mueller report in prison.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I bet you weren't laughing though, were you?
It was a very exasperated laugh at some parts.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. It's unreal. That's why it gets more like into a personal thing rather than really rooted in law. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Now, you don't like to embrace the title then of whistleblower? Did I get that right?
Correct.
So, do you embrace patriot? What
I
label,
would.
title? Tell me.
Well-intentioned person, a person of well intention. No, I mean, yeah, I want to make sure that when we talk about whistleblowing, we do keep it in the legal realm, and that we do make sure it is centered around fraud, waste, and abuse. Because until those people are properly protected, we don't even have any latitude for anything else.
That is absolutely correct. And you know, you have the same thought process as a lot of whistleblowers that I talk to. You were simply trying to make things better. Uh, you were trying to do the right thing, and then they land in this incredible hot water. I think of the FinCEN whistleblower who did the same thing. You know, released information. She had no idea about the avenues open as a whistleblower, and she also brought it to the media. And of course, they accidentally outed her, and she ended up in prison. A wonderful gal like you. And so there was the same idea there. She said, I was just trying to do the right thing. How, tell me how reality is leaking, misappropriated as spying.
It's kind of like a square and a rectangle. In order to spy, well, and then of course, spying is so weird because it's like I thought spying referred to gathering information on somebody else, not giving information. So my definition of spying has been completely just like blown away. Um, but I suppose if you're using spying as a sort of collaboration with the enemy, then a leak must occur. But a leak can occur without spying. The only thing is that when you are releasing that information or leaking it, I guess the biggest thing for anybody in my position to ever consider moving forward is once that information leaves your hands, it's not your narrative anymore.
No.
You don't decide if it gets published. And if it does get published, you don't decide when it gets published. I was already in custody when mine was published. You don't decide how it gets published, in what context. You don't decide if they publish all of it or parts of it. And you don't decide who they give it to before they publish it. So in my case, I got very lucky. I wound up sending that information directly to who is basically an intelligence mole at The Intercept, and he sent it straight back to the NSA to find out where it came from. And so I got really lucky. I kept it in the network. But you can also have somebody saying like, hey, I work with the Washington Post. I want all your classified information. I'll keep you safe. And he could have sent that straight to a nefarious government. So leaking can become spying, but the act of leaking, and again, that is why personal intent should matter in a court of law. This is the only charge where your intent and criminal background do not matter. If you accidentally kill somebody, they downgrade it to manslaughter.
Yes.
So in a lot of ways, when people are like, "What did you do?" Like people who don't understand what I did, I kind of tell them, like, I accidentally committed espionage. you know, um, because certainly that information went around the world, but that was
Yes.
not my intention.
Yes. Do you have any interest at all in, you know, collaborating with other whistleblowers or talking to them or dealing with them in any aspect? Or is this a part of your life you just like, ah, don't want that?
So I do work with a whistleblower support network, and they do provide legal counsel to people before, if they're considering giving up classified information. And they're the ones that are going to counsel them on either to not do it or how to do it within the confines of the law. Um, and then other legal whistleblowers, like, say you work at a corporation and there's fraud, waste, and abuse. How do you do that legally? And not everything needs to be national security. So they work with public servants and they give them an attorney before they act in case
Yes.
things do go south. And they also teach them how to, if they're going to approach a journalist, how to do that, how to suss somebody out, how to check that journalist's background. Um, so basically, my role in that is to be the poster child of what not to do.
Yes.
And seriously, don't do what I did. And seriously, have an attorney before you get arrested so that when the FBI does show up, you actually do have the option of asking for an attorney.
Yes.
Because I just thought, like, when, the cops show up, if you don't personally know an attorney or a number, they're not going to sit there on a Saturday night while you Google attorneys within the area who answer
Mhm.
their office phone and who might show up and help you.
You're absolutely 100% spot on. That's the advice I also try to relay because it's so critically important because it is a very complex system for whistleblowers, extremely complex. So, knowing what you know now about the system and the channels for reporting, what would you have done differently?
Nothing. I would have either continued to do my job. I mean, what I had lost, no, I mean, not personal loss, but professional loss, is I was 1 week away from a language test that would determine if I was eligible to go to Afghanistan,
Ugh,
and be part of something that I felt was important, not just for the United States, but for the world.
yes,
And I really feel like, not that I had drank the Kool Aid on the post 9/11 wars that the United States was engaging in, was that if I could advance my career, I wanted to be the person in the room when the big decisions were made that still had empathy, that still
yes,
had a working knowledge of neurology and what happens with human trauma, and to be part of, at that point in time, we were just still digging in this hole, which we still see today, of fighting fire with fire. And it's the same method that gave us ISIS. If you are fighting against people who are already extremists and then you traumatize their children, you know what I mean? Their children now put people in cages and set them on fire. What is the next generation going to do if you keep bombing that generation? So I really wanted to work my way up and be that person in the room who had a shred of compassion and understanding of extremism, and that it ends with the children, and it ends with the next generation, and it ends with stability and childhood development and nutrition and all the basic things, and not bombs and not occupations and invasions. So if that mattered to me, and that's what I've lost forever, right? Because I'll
Yes.
never be that person in the room again. You know what I mean? I'll never be allowed any sort of decision making capacity for the United States as far as our national security is concerned, as far as reducing terrorism around the globe is concerned. So I would have kept my head down, and I would have played the game, and I would have, you know what I mean? I would have done my job.
Yes. And that kind of is the critical juncture most whistleblowers or patriots face, isn't it? Whether to give up everything that they hold dear or to do the right thing. And you chose to do the right thing, whether you thought it was at the time or not. It was an incredible thing you did. And I hope your words are heard. Your words are valuable. You don't want to waste them. They're very valuable. I hope somebody who's dealing with the Mideast issues hears what you just said. I mean, those are valuable words. And so you're a valuable resource. What are you planning on doing? I know whistleblowers, they're patriots, they're out of their job, their career. They lose everything. What are you planning on doing now for the rest of your life? What do you hope for?
Yeah. I'm at a crossroads right now. Personally, I'm currently coaching full time. I coach CrossFit and I work with kids 4 days a week. And I had wanted to pursue more coaching opportunities and expanding my professional coaching career. Unfortunately, this felony is going to basically hold me back from that. Like I could get any education I wanted. Um, Getting the certification just to coach PE in a public school, never going to happen. There is no way through that. And I respect that. I respect why that protection's in place. Um, but for me personally, it's a roadblock. There is a mentorship program down here called the One Heart, and it's for juveniles in the criminal justice system. And that program is proven to reduce recidivism of teenagers from 77% to below 20%.
Oh,
Um, and they had actually they were going to offer me a job as not only just a one-on-one mentor, but to actually go into these detention centers and coach, because it started with a detention center football team. However, you must have, in order to get clearance, you could be a felon, but you must have 10 years from the date of your last day in, or of your last sentence. So I get off probation this November,
yes.
2024. So in November 2034, I will be able to get clearance for something like that. So in the meantime, I'm applying for college. I'm going to use my GI Bill. And we have been rescuing dogs basically like every few weeks here. It's kind of what we do. And this last one was really inspirational and just really kind of opened my eyes. And I looked into what it takes for the state board, and it's a case by case basis. As long as your felony is not violent or has anything to do with like stealing drugs or medication, because I think I could get through with this felony. So hopefully I can start the veterinary tech program this year.
And as my good friend Fred Whitehurst says, another FBI whistleblower, there is life after whistleblowing. So I'm glad you're looking forward to something and you're finding. What about the process that people have been trying to overturn your conviction? Where's that at?
It's been knocked down to 0. There
Wow.
was a year that we did apply, And they said even for anything like clemency or a pardon is 5 years after the last day. So again, in November 2029, I will be eligible to apply.
Wow. Wow.
In other words, Biden has zero interest. So,
Right. Oh, wow. But, I hate to say it, but it all adds to this legacy around you. It will all add because the suffering you have endured, and I understand the time you spent in a correctional facility was not easy and was very difficult. It changed you, didn't it?
oh, definitely. And not for the better.
Right. I'm really sorry you had to go through that. That was brutal. It was brutal. Are you planning on writing a book?
Yes. And of course, nothing ever comes easy, but we're at that process where a manuscript will be sent to the NSA.
Of course.
Unfortunately, I am not John Bolton, so I don't get to ask for it back. I don't get to pressure them. Um, so we'll see what they do with it, if they want to play games and not do anything with it or not. But I know the way I wrote it, you know, I know I made sure to give it to word it in such a way to make it easy for them. I knew who I was dealing with. I knew that this would go through them, and I think that the bigger story for me is what happened after the classified information.
Right. I'm looking forward to the book. I will attend one of your book signings. I will just come up out of the crowd and have you sign it for me. Um, also, your words are very prophetic and wise. Are you planning on writing articles or commentating on anything that's happening? Like this thing by President Macron. I don't even know if you read the newspapers anymore because they can be triggering. But he just came out and talked about it was Russian assets that painted Jewish symbols, and he's talking about the Russians destabilizing the European countries. You know something about that? Does first of all, does that trigger you? Do you even read the newspapers or articles anymore? And are you even interested in writing about some of these current events?
I'm definitely just interested in the state of the world where we're at right now. It definitely feels like there's a lot of puppeteering going around. As far as writing, I think that the most important thing when it comes to like a lot of these opinion pieces is the timeliness of it. And I'm bound by a plea deal to never discuss anything that could even be related. So it's broad, it's vague and menacing, my plea deal. Anything related or that could be related to classified information. Um, so saying countries that start with the letter R, for example, could be, could not be. Um, so the process for NSA clearance, and they make it as old fashioned as possible, is it must be printed out and mailed, and then they will mail it back. And I believe at one point my attorney and I had done like a litmus test, and we had sent some talking points because we knew I was going to do a lot of media. It took them 6 months
Yes.
to go through a page and a half of various talking points. Um, so I could absolutely write an opinion article right now of something that happened this morning, and I would hope to publish my opinion piece, by August or September.
Yes.
Yeah. So as a relevant writer, it would not be very it would not be a rewarding process. Let's put it
I
that
hear
way.
you. Do you ever get that itch, reality, to write something? Do you read these articles about countries that might start with an R. Do you read these articles?
I read them. I mean, I definitely get the itch to tweet about it, right?
Yes.
I think a well-aimed tweet can do more than an article at certain points. And then I just think, what's the gain? What's the outcome? What mind are you changing? Um, and I just look at what I can physically do today with my own two hands and my spoken words to make somebody's life better instead. And I just kind of direct it into something positive.
You realize some people do view you with the P word, which is profit, because they feel that you have seen the future, which makes you very powerful. Do you think the NSA, the government, that's what they're scared of?
I think my own self defense is just constantly reassuring myself that it's not about me, that if anybody else had done what I had done, they'd kick them as hard and they would keep them down as hard. Um, so that it's not a state of learned helplessness or feeling personally targeted. Um, but it is hard because none of my phones ever seem to work, and bad things
I do.
happen when I get too invested in watching the news. So,
Hmm.
you know, and I've had interviews with the NSA since all of this because they wanted to know what they could do in the future to make it not
Yes.
happen, and they weren't asking from a punitive sense. They were asking more from a profiling sense. Like,
Yes.
seriously, what can we do in our organization so that people who think like you can work here without doing stuff like this? Because it mattered. Because they definitely, they're not the Department of Justice. They had, they didn't have that much of a role in my prosecution or mistreatment when I was incarcerated, but they did realize, like, this is somebody who wasn't trying to shut everything down and burn it down, and this wasn't a
Hmm.
revolutionary. This was, someone who cared. And you know we actually had a actually very productive conversation about the environment that they can foster where people can ask questions. If somebody can look at something at work and actually say out loud in their facility, why isn't this public, without being whisked away to room 101?
Yes.
um and I mean, obviously I'm not there, I don't know what happened after that, but I mean, hopefully they took that to heart and didn't just install more security.
I think that's incredible. I do. And I'm glad that they ask. I agree with you. Who knows what they're going to do? But they need to recognize that there's people with a conscience and there's people who are looking to defend, the people in the United States, the citizens, because I think you took the same oath I did, which is to protect and defend. And so I hope they do use it for good and not for bad. How having experience in this field, reality, how can we reach people in the contractor and military fields to disseminate information on whistleblower programs?
um that's the hardest thing, is because when you're in there, when you're actually indoctrinated, as it's called, with your clearance, there's so much fear, because my understanding of what we were told is that I had a top secret clearance when Edward Snowden made his. It was after Chelsea Manning, but during Edward Snowden. And they told us that there are articles on what he released, and there's articles about his like the pursuit of him, right? Since there wasn't a court case, there's articles about him that you cannot read. So when they would come out, an email would go out telling us you cannot read this article in the New York Times, this article in the Washington Post, or anything like this. And their reasoning was that article contains unvetted classified information. And if you look at it on your cell phone or your personal computer, even if you delete your browser history, that information being shown on your screen can be detected, meaning you had classified information on your computer, and that's a felony. And you will lose everything. They said, we can find out. If we think that you read the article, we can find it on your computer's hard drive somewhere and prove that you were storing or you are storing classified information on a personal device. And in that culture, I had never read an article about Edward Snowden. I had never read an article about Chelsea Manning. We didn't know exactly what they had done. We didn't know what their legal issues, what they were actually even charged with. We didn't know. We only knew what they were telling us. In fact, there was just one funny night. So we did have TVs with cable, right? And one night, as we were working a mission, Fox News was on, and it had something from WikiLeaks on the TV, a classified document. And so it was like classificationception, where we were like in NSA watching classified information on a non-classified screen. And we were just like, what's going to happen? Is the screen going to explode? Like, are the police going to come in and tear the TV off the wall? And, because you don't know what it means. And they keep it so vague like that. So if you were in my position thinking about these whistleblower options, you would probably be too afraid to Google it. You'd probably, the next whistleblower, the next leaker, no matter how good their intention was, is probably going to be afraid to Google reality winner. They're probably afraid to watch the movies because they don't know. They don't know if they're allowed to see this information or not, or if it's going to be stored in their profile somewhere that they watched it, they must be sympathetic, therefore they're going to do it. And that's how they do it. They kind of, there's a culture of fear of not displaying any sort of interest in what the options are.
Well, I certainly would hope everyone sees your film. I watched it, and it made me think of a lamb being brought to slaughter. It really did. I wish you had an attorney there. And that's why I wish everybody could see it. Because that can happen to anybody. And it happened to you. So I hope everybody watches that movie. I do. I hope everybody does and takes some lessons away from it. Another question I was going to ask, are you big or not big on whistleblowers or patriots reaching out to you? Is that something that triggers you, or is that something that you like? To be able to assist other whistleblowers, to give them advice, information?
Mind speaking out or speaking to other whistleblowers, I think that it's good to have like the support network.
Yes.
I do feel, not that we're like, a club or anything, but I feel the most close to Terry Albury and Daniel Hale. because we were all sort of burned by the same media, the same intercept. And it was really just malicious what happened to us with the intercept, because they got to have their cake and eat it too. They let go of our identities, and then they were the champions of the martyrs as we sat in our jail cells and reported on the conditions we were facing or the legal hardship,
Yes.
when they were the cause of a lot of it. Not that I would never have gotten caught. I'm not a mastermind. um, and it just bothers me. Like the intercept, like the saddest part is if they weren't going to publish that information, it only had value once they found out I was in custody. That's why they published it, because they knew they were about to announce my arrest. So they wanted to publish it first. They published it 1 hour before the DA announced my arrest on that Monday. So, their information is worth more when someone's in prison for it.
Yes.
So I have nothing kind ever to say about the intercept. But I do know that when it comes to Daniel Hale and Terry, that, you know, our our persecution didn't end in the courtroom. We were all treated differently in jail. We were given different probation requirements of anybody else. Um, and it's life moving forward is just that much harder because of the severity of what we were charged with compared to our actions. Um, and so we definitely have that in common. And I think for me, I have that in common. And then anybody who's been incarcerated, anybody who's been to federal prison is just somebody that I immediately is just like, if you know, you know. Um, but definitely, I'm always open to hearing from them, and, not just like comparing trauma or battle scars, but just like that empathetic connection and how to move forward.
Exactly. You're not only a role model, you're building an incredible legacy. I so appreciate you talking to us. I think it's vitally important. I really do, for people of integrity, and you are one. I look forward to seeing how your legacy plays out. I think it's going to be phenomenal. And I thank you for your time and your
Thank
brilliant
you.
thoughts. Your brilliant thoughts. Thank you, Reality.
Thanks. I really appreciate it. I had a great time being on here. And I think I got really emotional. I just want to kind of go back to, you were talking about the movie Reality, where the one that's just about my arrest and being around all those FBI agents. And, it's just like, it's always, and maybe not a deflection, but you said, you wish there was an attorney on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, like where I've been lately, like hurting so much for this country, like my first thought, like I got emotional because it was like, at least I survived, like my first thought was, I wish George Floyd had an attorney on the scene.
Yes.
And I can understand why so many people can see that movie and not be moved by it, because at least the girl in that movie survived.
Yes, you survived, but you got brutalized.
I just want this whole system to do so much better than it is now.
And thanks to you, I think it will. Your sacrifice means something. It really does. Your sacrifice means something. And I thank you. And I think this nation should thank you, Reality. So, on their behalf, please let me thank you for all you have done. You're an incredible human being, and you did an incredible thing. And thank you for warning us where everybody else was saying, not true. fake news. You were telling the truth. And in a world of lies, reality, telling the truth is an incredible act. And I thank you for that.
Thank you so much. I just
You
wish
bet.
it wasn't so costly.
I know. Thank you again. This is going to make an impact on a lot of people.
Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to read more whistleblower stories, go to www.whistleblowersblog.org. Music by Rachel Kilgore. Editing and booking by Anissa Shake and Victoria Thompson. And a special thanks to our sponsors, Whistleblower Network News.
That is just as hard to stand up tall as it was when you were small. The truth is hard to say.